critique of Singapore society. It's quite sadly done. And also the way we've come, so having done that anthology and seeing it was a pleasure actually to read these and to think of it in a different way. And in a way, a lot of work has been done lately. I hope you know small pleasure by Angus's Angelia short stories. I mean, I think that the short story form seems to be studied. The short story form in Singapore needs to be studied. As perhaps contributing quite uniquely to Singapore literature. And I mean, to do that, most of us grew up thinking of actually many short stories. Little Ironies Angelia was published in 1979. But many of Anglia's stories were written before that, and so was very was stories. But we don't know them now. Even the relatively recent publication of Angelis short stories it's also considered different. It suggests that there's a rich tradition of short story writing in Whitehead. But I guess what I like about the short stories is I was quite struck by the Chinese familial relations as opposed to the place in the story. The 5-year plan. I kind of, because just a little what I did about what I did today. I gave a talk at School of the Arts in we were looking at the 5-year plan, as well as one of Yak's poems titled Looking At. And I was very struck by the parent-child relationship in both of these works. And also, actually, quite a large amount of domestic violence in the way that he chronicles in some of these stories. And the 5-year plan struck me as only 2 pages long, but very subtle and rich in a way. There's a woman there where certain objects take on symbolic significance in the carpets where but there's a touching moment when the mother, after a visit to the son, realizes that there's a elf between them. She keeps that carpet square. Somehow that's very poignant and very nicely done. It also, as a story, reminds me of Peter Wolfson's story. You've read that, but somehow that idea of going into depth seems to be more that story. But anyway, I guess what the things that strike me most about these stories are the social commentary, Singapore, change, and familiar relations. And I don't know, I'm taken by the idea of domestic violence, some kind of violence.
Yeah, I'm interested in this idea of Yap as a social commentator. Okay, in an interview that I managed to find, okay, he said this, I'm not a person who wants to write poems, and I suppose short stories, okay, I'm not a person who wants to write poems with a political basis or a social basis. If that is really what I want to do, then I would rather be a politician or a social worker. So, and I think in the context of this quote is the idea that Yap wanted to stay away from being seen as a kind of political commentator. And yet, as you mentioned, and I think, was it Shirley Lim in one of the chapters talked about him as a social satirist, So, how do you reconcile that with the fact that he doesn't want to be overtly seen as a political kind of commentator, with the fact that his stories, as you mentioned, reveal that. Do you see any kind of tension in that in his stories?
I think the fact that he's quite unobtrusive, that helps perhaps give his work kind of political power now. this moment. I mean, I think the stories resonate precisely because he probably wrote them without any word political agenda or not wanting to be seen as in a particular way. So as a kind of observation of whatever was going on in families and in society at that time, somehow in a way, ironically, it speaks more powerfully to me, I guess, as a kind of social commentary that was not so didactic. I mean, I think that there are writers who want to make a political commentary quite didactic and all that, but that's not, somehow that's more.
Okay. All right. So since we're talking about writing style, I'm going to move on to Joshua. Okay, Joshua is a talented and upcoming, gifted young Singapore writer. Recently published two collections of poems called Sonnets from the Singlish and Making Love with Scrabble Tongue. So I encourage you guys to take a look at it. In addition, he's multi-talented. He dabbles in music, short story writing, and more recently working on a graphic novel. Okay, so all right, Joshua, can you just tell us when you first read his stories, what struck you about his writing, and how do you think his stories compare with his poems?
I'm a relatively young writer and not academic, so this is actually quite difficult for me, as well as quite easy at the same time. Difficult because normally in a poetry reading, I would just respond to any difficult question by reading a poem. And easy because in this case I can't do that, but I can read Arthur Yap's poems, which are even better. So, to me, the work of Arthur Yap's prose at least cannot be divorced from his poetry. Simply because, very small volume, very thick volume, and really, there is a huge gap in time between the first three stories and the last three stories that Angus mentioned, and they both share quite a few aspects, and to me, they are both tied up in stenography. I see Arthur Yap as about three things for now. One is Arthur Yap as a linguist, Arthur Yap as a painter, and Arthur Yap as a deeply private individual. And these aspects of his stenography all feature very strongly in his writing, whether prose or poetry. The first part is Arthur Yap as a linguist, and I guess as we mentioned he has before, Arthur Yap is known for his wordplay, his diction, his intimate choice of words. And this comes true from the very first story in the collection, which is just less than 2 pages, very short, and also the most interesting one for me as well. When I read it, I was like, 2 pages only. It's a prose poem to me at least. And it exhibits many of the characteristics of Arthur Yap's work. Short, terse, intimate choice of language. And even so, even with that economy of language, he still finds time to play with words. All the opening lines is like, he's going somewhere, whether wise or otherwise, toying with puns, toying with different meanings, which is a very Arthur Yap thing to do. I'm going to sneak out a poem at this point from Arthur Yap. Just an extract from one of his poems called Paraphrase. When one wonders how to begin to talk about something, the word swallows the world. The word comes close to carrying its own ontology, its own reward for being. And there's more, but I won't go on. That is very much about the way that he writes. He riffs on the word, he goes on again and again. And he uses that to actually draw out plot, when plot actually doesn't exist in many of these stories. The man wandering in a house doesn't go anywhere, he sees things, he plays on words, the words come, the words drive his emotions, and he discards the events that he sees equally as fast. And that is just something that is common to both his poetry and his prose. The next bit is Arthur Yap's painter. Painter, well, the first thought is yes, it's very visual, it's very graphic, it's very descriptive. Lots of his poems are titled Still Life, or just have a piece of scenery, a piece of geography, a piece of landscape. And he riffs on words of those. And that's true of many of these short stories as well. He goes to a place, nothing much really happens, especially for the first 3 stories. And then the story ends, and you wonder, what has happened? You have an image. Even the story which has more plot in the, for example, the 5-year plan, which breaks the classical unity of a short story by spanning 5 years. Nothing really happens in the 5-year plan. A couple go through financial difficulty, they work hard, they work hard, they work hard, they work hard. 5 years later, still working hard, to the point where the 5-year plan itself loses its relevance. The number 5 doesn't mean anything anymore. The debt doesn't mean anything anymore. The working hard has consumed their entire life. And that is the same sense of stasis that Arthur York captures in his poetry, in his view of things as just a snapshot of time. I'm going to read a short extract of something as well, which I need to find.